Chapter 141. Action. Kill. Kill them. Kill everyone. Eddie jerked awake, gasping. Sweat slicked his forehead. The whispering voice still hummed at the edge of his consciousness, cold and alien, dragging him out of sleep the way it always did. He blinked against the afterimage of a nightmare and tried to focus. Where am I? A familiar female voice broke the fog with a note of concern. Eddie turned, and the scene fell into place. He was on a mission, and his target, Amy, was lying beside him. A quilt covered most of her, leaving a strip of skin exposed. She was clearly naked. His heart stuttered. He remembered nothing from the night before. After the bartender had dragged him into the shower, he'd fallen asleep in the hot water. But why was he in the same bed as Amy? Had he really? Ahem. It's okay. I just had a nightmare, he lied, trying to sound calm. He pointed at the two of them as if to say, You and me. What happened? Amy bit her lip, a shy smile on her face, but there was a clever glint behind it. Don't worry. Nothing happened, she whispered. You slept like a baby. I thought you needed some care. Relief washed through Eddie so hard it almost made him dizzy. Innocence preserved. But the relief quickly braided with something else, heat, a dangerous flutter. He reached for her, impatient. Now that you're awake, why don't you? Amy slipped away with the grace of a swallow, a teasing smile curving her mouth. I'm going to take a shower. If you're uncomfortable, just lie back down. Eddie stared, stunned. Of course, this old trick. He felt the familiar itch of want and the embarrassment of being played. He let out a helpless little sigh and watched the bathroom door close. Forget it, he muttered to himself, forcing a grin that came out half sneer, half awkward. I won't be merciless later. The bravado was brittle. Eddie had never killed anyone. That failure nagged at him like a stain. The strange murmurs, those single-idea voices, were coming more often, their rhythm insistent in his head. He looked at his hands, fingers trembling. The thought of blood tightened his chest like a hand. He had spent years being trained like a special agent, but the act of taking a life remained beyond him. He was, in his own bones, ordinary, conflicted, frightened, unable to breathe when he pictured the worst. Amy emerged from the bathroom with droplets in her hair, skin glowing. She had intended to tease him, but she stopped when she saw him, not the cocky man from last night, but a hollowed figure staring at the ceiling. A small, private smile tugged at her. Vulnerable people were easier to steer. She sat beside him and cupped his face, fingers cool against his cheek. Don't dwell on whatever's bothering you, she murmured, pity and promise braided in her tone. Come with me. I'll make you forget. The offer was gentle but certain, like warm water coaxing ice into melt. Eddie's eyes flickered, hope warring with suspicion. Can I really forget? His voice was a dry rasp, clinging to the question like a lifeline. Amy nodded. Trust me, it will work. He inhaled and let the decision form. Slowly, the despair at the corners of his eyes eased, a thin thread of resolve lit. Okay, I'll go with you. Amy's delight was quiet but real. She'd already won half the battle. She would guide him where she wanted, one step at a time, folding him into whatever dream she had made for him. Eddie, for his part, felt a small, private satisfaction, a confirmation that he'd handled his cover well. He told himself he was doing his job. He'd earned her trust quickly. He didn't notice the one word he'd missed the night before, when Amy had spoken under her breath, sacrifice. If he'd caught that, he might not have been so willing. They left the pub together, light and smiling like a couple in love. They didn't see the dark sedan idling 2 blocks away, or the agents tracking every turn. S-Shield watched them from a safe distance. The feed reached Coulson first. Do we move in now? One of the field agents asked. Coulson's face tightened. Be ready. We've lost a few team members while tailing them. Stay alert. Understood. Steve's grip tightened on the shield at his side. He and Coulson exchanged a look that needed no words. The operation could tip either way in a heartbeat. Their car slipped quietly into traffic, taking an alternate route so as not to be spotted. The mood in the vehicle was taut and focused. Elsewhere, Bronsky and Walker were mobilizing a team of elite operatives and heading into the city with one objective, arrest Banner. Every piece was moving. The only question left was whether anyone knew to do exactly what Amy planned to do with her sacrifice. Chapter 142, Party Way. I never expected Amy to be so determined to cheer Eddie up. She had planned an entire day of food, drink, and diversion, as if she wanted to wash away the fog inside him with a flood of pleasure. Eddie surrendered to it, soaking up the rare ease. Behind them, though, Coulson, Steve, and the others trailed covertly, exhausted from keeping pace with their erratic route. Night fell, and the city neon came alive. Amy flashed a secretive smile. "I'm taking you somewhere great," she promised. "I guarantee all your troubles will disappear." Eddie looped his arm around her slender waist, grinning. "As long as I'm with you, I have no worries. Amy, you really are an angel." Amy laughed, a bright, bell-like sound. "I wouldn't call myself an angel, but I can show you a real one." "Really?" Eddie raised an eyebrow, half skeptical. Just come with me," she said, lips curving. "But I need to pick up a few people first." "Pick someone up?" Eddie asked, puzzled, then climbed into the car obediently. He soon found himself jammed into a cramped back seat with several unfamiliar men. The air felt stale and heavy, hard to breathe. Amy smiled apologetically. "Sorry, I've got a lot of friends. You don't mind, do you?" It's fine, the men chorused, then exchanged awkward, unmistakably embarrassed looks. Eddie felt a pang of disillusionment. He had never expected her to keep such obvious backups. He was glad, in some strange way, that his innocence remained intact. The car threaded through the night as Amy's laughter blended with the men's low talk, creating a strange, charged atmosphere. Eddie watched the city slip by, feeling a mix of excitement and unease. He wondered if Steve and the others had caught up. They stopped in front of a brightly lit building. Amy turned to him and winked. "Here we are. Ready to meet the real angel?" He followed her inside, squeezing past the others into a wide, well-lit hall. It was full of laughter, men and women of all ages milling together, the mood lively and convivial. Eddie craned his neck, confused. Then his eyes landed on a young woman wearing angel wings, standing among a cluster of laughing friends. She smiled innocently like morning light, and something in Eddie stirred. Could this be what Amy meant? Doubt tugged at him. Was Coulson's information wrong? The crowd seemed perfectly ordinary. People smiled with natural ease. The warmth in the room relaxed him, and he felt his own lips tilt into a grin. The men who'd ridden with him were quickly surrounded by enthusiastic women, and the group pushed toward the center of the hall. "Welcome, new friends. Let's celebrate," a voice called out. The hall erupted in a deafening cheer that felt like it might lift the roof. The welcome washed over Eddie, and for a moment his spirits rose. But his attention kept snapping back to the angel-winged woman. Her smile was coy, but her eyes seemed oddly distant, deep, unreadable. A chill crawled up Eddie's spine. Something about the whole scene keyed his suspicion. He made himself stay alert, scanning the room for anything off. Amy appeared at his side, startling him. She had the girl with wings by the arm. "Eddie, look, this is the angel you wanted. Do you like her?" Amy's smile was radiant, a victorious glint in her eye. The girl returned a shy smile that didn't reach her eyes, and Eddie felt a cold knot form in his gut. "No," he said, forcing a lightness he didn't feel. "I still prefer you, Amy." She laughed like a chime and, with a flourish, picked up a nearby glass and handed it to him. The men who had come with them were already holding identical glasses. The liquid inside was a warm orange gold that caught the light. "Come on, let's drink together," someone shouted, and the room roared in agreement. Glasses were raised in a synchronized wave. The women on either side of him watched him closely. Eddie felt boxed in. He swallowed and lifted his glass. "Cheers!" He tried to steady his voice, but his heart was doing a brisker tempo. The clink of crystal sounded oddly pronounced. Without thinking about it, he downed the drink in one. Amy glanced at his empty glass with a satisfied smile. The music surged louder, the volume pressing against Eddie's eardrums. The crowd thinned around him. The bright lights seemed to dim incrementally, as if someone were turning them down. Then, with a muffled thud, a portly man nearby collapsed to the floor. His face was pale, eyes glassy. This wasn't simple drunkenness. One by one, people around Eddie slumped as if felled by an invisible force. Eddie's pupils pinched and cold sweat prickled his forehead. He clamped his hands to his temples and, mimicking the unconscious posture of those around him, let his body go limp and fall. The music tapered off until it dissolved into silence, and a new sound took its place, the measured tread of many footsteps, dry and precise. Eddie cracked his eyes open just a fraction. Through the fringe of his lashes, he saw figures in black cloaks moving in a slow circle around him. Their steps were deliberate and heavy, each footfall landing like a countdown. An oppressive, ominous presence closed in. He shut his eyes again and screamed silently in his head. "Captain, help me!" Chapter 143, Ceremony. On a rooftop about 100 meters from the target building, Steve kept a pair of binoculars trained on a second-story window. He wore an earpiece, staying in contact with Coulson, who was on standby elsewhere. "Everything looks fine so far," he whispered, not taking his eyes off the glass. "They seem to be enjoying themselves." "Really? Have you seen Eddie?" Coulson's voice came through the headset, edged with tension. "No, only a small part of the room is visible." Steve's frown deepened and his gaze sharpened. "Wait, what's wrong, Captain?" Coulson's tone went urgent. "Something's happening." Steve's voice dropped to a hard whisper. In an instant, the curtains in the room were drawn closed, cutting off his view. He reported quickly, "They either discovered us or they're starting. I'm going to check it out. Don't move." "Understood. Keep in touch. Let me know if anything goes wrong." Coulson sounded worried. "Yeah." Steve terminated the transmission to avoid any stray noise. He dropped from the rooftop and moved fast and silent toward the target building, hugging shadowed walls and avoiding obvious sightlines. The night wind bit his cheeks, but his face remained unreadable as he ran through contingency plans in his head, every possible variable, every response. Faint footsteps from inside broke the quiet. Steve froze against the cold brick, heart thudding in his chest, praying he hadn't been seen. The footsteps faded. He breathed out slowly and looked up. A faint line of light showed where the curtains didn't quite meet, a narrow gap in the window. He found a handhold between tiles and swung up with cat-like agility, fingers scraping softly against the masonry. When he reached the sill more than 10 meters above the ground, he paused to steady himself, then pushed off and vaulted into the room. His feet hit the narrow ledge with practiced precision. He crouched, pressed to the frame like a watchful animal, and peered through the slit. The lights had gone out. In the dimness, more than a dozen people lay scattered across the floor, unmoving. A ring of figures in black cloaks stood around them, silent and ominous, moving like phantoms. A cold dread slid down Steve's spine. These had to be the worshippers, believers of that god. There were far more of them than he'd expected. Before he could act, a voice, sudden and intimate, spoke in his head. "Boy, if I were you, I wouldn't be so rash. There are more than 10 of them below you. You couldn't take one." Mysterious people? Steve thought back. He could tell the voice regarded them as dangerous, but it didn't frighten him. "Scared? Me?" The Holy Lord's voice brightened with glee. "I could knock them all down with one hand. You're not forgetting our deal, are you?" "I haven't forgotten," the voice replied, "but because of your drag, my strength has been cut by more than half. I can guarantee your safety at most, not anything more." Steve let the inner argument go. He didn't have time for bickering. Saving people was what he did. Since becoming Captain America, he lived by that duty. He switched his communicator back on, keeping his voice low and steady. "Coulson, can you hear me?" "Yeah, Captain. What's wrong?" "I found cloaked worshippers. I need backup." "I'm on my way," Coulson answered without hesitation. Below, the cloaked figures were closing in on their victims and forming a circle. A man in a cloak marked with a gold ring stepped forward, arms outstretched, lips moving in a low, ritualized chant. The air tightened, like a held breath. Then every cloaked worshipper drew a silver dagger and, without hesitation, slit their forearms. Blood ran freely, and the metallic scent filled the room. The men and women who'd just cut themselves looked unmoved by their own injuries, as if some external force ruled them now. One by one, they edged toward the prone figures on the floor, the movement deliberate and hungry. Steve's jaw set. He couldn't wait for backup. Those people were in immediate danger, and Eddie, somewhere among them, had to be given a chance. He pulled his shield from his back, braced, and kicked through the glass. The window exploded inward in a spray of shards. Steve dropped more than 10 meters, rolled on impact, and came up with the shield in front of him, polished metal catching the faint light. He drew himself up and shouted, "Stop!" The shout cracked through the room. The cloaked circle froze and turned, astonished. Someone on the floor, Eddie, opened his eyes. For a heartbeat, determination replaced whatever resignation had held him. He pushed himself up and lunged at the leader. The leader, however, seemed to have expected it. He extended a hand toward Eddie and intoned a single word, slow and inexorable. Flame. In the next instant, flame erupted, stabbing upward into the air. Chapter 144. Arrest. Flames erupted from the leader's broad palms, throwing Eddie's astonished face into harsh, flickering light. The inferno surged and lunged like an angry fire dragon. Eddie threw himself back, watching the blaze pass inches from his eyes and feeling the heat as if it could sear his skin. A lock of hair caught in the flame and turned instantly to charcoal, the air filled with the acrid smell of burning hair. Before he could exhale in relief, Steve shouted, "Eddie, watch out!" Eddie reacted on instinct, crashing backward to the floor. A dagger flashed where he had been a moment before, the blade glinting cold and lethal in the dim light. The man holding it was thin, cloaked, his smile cruel and unreadable. Eddie rolled to one side to avoid the blow, not noticing an attack coming from the other direction. A slender leg whipped through the air and smashed into his abdomen with the force of a truck. Pain exploded across him as he was hurled into the air, crashed to the ground, and skidded across the floor, knocking over tables and chairs. His insides felt shredded, his face drained of color, cold sweat beaded at his temples. He forced himself up on shaking hands, every breath a razor of pain. Two cloaked figures stood before him, blocking his way, their eyes hard and unyielding. The taller of the two spoke with a mocking chill in his voice. "I didn't expect you'd lie to us." Eddie's heart sank. He narrowed his eyes. "Amy," he said. On the other side of the room, Steve could no longer hold back. Rage lit him up. He grabbed his shield by the rim and hurled it with all his strength. The shield described a bright arc and bore down on the cloaked men, only to be caught effortlessly in the hand of a tall figure who had been standing calmly in the dark. Steve froze, stunned. He knew how much force he'd put behind that throw. The fact that the man had stopped it as if it were a toy set off alarms in his head. This wasn't an ordinary opponent. Steve tightened his fists and braced for a fight. The leader, his cloak trimmed with a gold ring, smiled with faint contempt. "Amy, Johnson, finish them. The rest of you, continue the sacrificial rite to the Great Spirit." "Yes," came the cold chorus. Far from that house of masked faces, under a sky as black as ink, Bronsky and Walker slipped up to an old, peeling hut. Darkness swallowed their silhouettes as a team of fully armed Special Forces operatives fanned out behind them. Every face was tense. Every weapon glinted dully in the night. They had to be discreet. Any international incident would be disastrous. The plan was to take Banner quietly, to subdue him without drawing attention. Bronsky crept to the door and signaled. A tech on his team released a handful of micromechanical probes, tiny spider-like devices that scuttled through the doorframe's gaps and streamed images back to their screen. Bronsky watched as the probes found Banner and locked on. Banner sat on his bed, legs crossed, eyes closed, as if deep in meditation. A hunter's smile curved Bronsky's mouth. Once you had your target, the rest was routine. The team slipped smoke canisters laced with anesthetic into the room. Thick, pungent cloud rolled in and filled the chamber. Still Banner remained motionless, seemingly undisturbed. Walker snorted. "He's just a civilian after all," he said, disappointed. "If he's been left alone this long, he's probably slacked off. I was hoping for a fight. What a letdown." Bronsky suppressed his impatience and focused on the mission. "We're here to finish the job," he said softly. When the window of their opportunity opened, Bronsky shoved the door and stormed in, team close behind, guns raised. The smoke thinned, and Banner was still there on the bed, eyes closed. He looked so calm, so detached, that Bronsky felt a chill run down his spine. Anyone else would have shown panic, or at least moved. Banner seemed to belong to a deeper place, untroubled by intruders. For a moment, Bronsky wondered if the man before him was even alive. No matter. The objective was arrest. Bronsky leveled his gaze at Walker. "You go in. Cuff him." Walker didn't bother with Bronsky's tone. He produced a pair of handcuffs and strode forward confidently. Banner's eyelids fluttered, then opened. Green eyes snapped up, ashen calm replaced by an animal, feral fury, and his whole face contorted as if a sleeping beast had been roused. Walker hesitated for only an instant before lunging, trying to subdue Banner before whatever he was could take full form. He didn't get the chance. In the next heartbeat, a massive green fist materialized and smashed into Walker's chest like a thunderclap. The force compressed Walker into a single line of pain and then flung him like a rag doll. He tore through an interior wall, traced an arcing trajectory through the night air, and hit the ground dozens of meters away. Silence fell, broken only by shocked gasps. Every soldier stared, faces pale with disbelief and fear. Banner's mouth curled into a terrifying grin. "Have you ever experienced the power of anger?" he asked, voice low and feral. Chapter 145, Hulk. Inside the modest house with a gaping hole in the wall, Bronski's eyes were locked on Banner, who looked harmless and human. Panic rose in him like a tide, squeezing the air from his lungs. What had happened just now? Because Walker's body had blocked his view, Bronski had only seen a flash of green, and then Walker had been slammed by an invisible, gigantic hand, smashed through the wall, and sent tumbling outside. Whether he lived or died, Bronski couldn't tell. The scene defied everything the intelligence had said. Banner only had world-shattering power when he became the Hulk. And yet Banner stood there in human form and had just knocked Walker away as if he were nothing. Bronski and Walker had been given the same super soldier serum at the same time. Their physicals were nearly identical. Bronski's advantage was only experience. If Banner could toss Walker like that, Bronski might not be a match either. He told himself Walker must have been careless. 2 seconds later, 100 possibilities had flashed through his head, and he made his decision. He could not simply retreat and explain nothing to General Ross. They had to fight. His face went cold. "Attack!" he barked. The team snapped to it, hands white on triggers. Bullets screamed through the room, cutting through dust and darkness. Banner stood still, eyes burning with anger. A bright green glow pulsed over him and, almost instantly, congealed into a gleaming armor that wrapped his body. Bullets pinged harmlessly off it. Bronski watched, unsettled. The light had come from Banner himself. Another Hulk power? Banner's voice was low and controlled, as if reining in a beast. "You want to kill me? Then I won't hold back." His tone climbed until it shattered the room. "Go to hell!" Brighter green light burst from him, so intense Bronski's vision stung. Instinct took over. "Fall back! Now!" he shouted. The quick-thinking men obeyed and poured out of the house with Bronski at their back. But a few of their teammates weren't fast enough. The house shuddered, then collapsed with a thunderous crack. Screams cut off mid-cry. They were trapped beneath the rubble. Outside, Bronski stopped and stared in horror at the wreckage. From the ruins rose a towering green figure more than 10 meters tall, slow and terrible as a thing pulled from a nightmare. The monster wasn't the dull, hulking brute the reports had described. It was larger and stranger, its skin translucent like polished jade, catching the moonlight and glowing with an inner strange light. Through that crystal sheath, Banner's human outline was visible, cradled at the giant's chest like a beating heart. Banner's face burned with rage, his eyes were molten fire. The two were fused, bound together. "What the hell?" Bronski muttered, disbelief plain in his voice. If the Hulk had been the version their intelligence described, Bronski would have still had a fighting chance. This thing snuffed out his confidence like a bucket of ice water. Before he could collect himself, the giant raised a foot like a puppeteer's toy and brought it down. The impact rolled outward in a brutal shockwave. Windows rattled, residents woke and peered out, horrified. Bronski felt the ground give and was hurled through the air, crashing to the street. Around him, buildings groaned and people screamed as plaster and glass rained down. "Son of a..." Bronski snarled, teeth gritted. He forced himself to his feet. The serum in his veins answered with terrifying power. His skin flushed a deep red, veins bulging, eyes rimmed with blood. He drew on everything he had and surged forward for a last-ditch fight. But Banner, or whatever controlled that hulking armor, was already moving. The giant reached down, tore a half-collapsed section of the house free, and hurled it like a battering ram. The wall struck Bronski with monstrous force. He was buried under timber and stone as the ground exploded outward. Banner's eyes flicked past the wreckage, a cold thought crossing his face. He frowned, sensing something in the distance. "It feels like he sent down his power again," he muttered. anger sharpening his voice. "Is this a blood sacrifice?" A snort escaped him. "I warned them not to do this long ago, and they disobeyed." The colossal armor vanished as suddenly as it had appeared, leaving two great wing-like appendages folded against Banner's back. With a thunderous beat, he launched into the air, wings unfolding, carrying him away like a dark, enormous falcon. In moments he was gone, a blurring silhouette against the sky. Minutes later, Walker stumbled back through the ruin, bloodied and out of breath. He dug through the debris and pulled Bronski free, half-conscious and barely holding on. Seeing Bronski's battered state, fear flickered across Walker's face. He fumbled for his communicator and spoke, voice tight. "General, the mission failed." Chapter 146, Battle. Earlier that night, the Great Hall was taut with menace. At the center of it all, a cloaked leader watched with cold indifference, ignoring Steve, who had just burst in, and Eddie, who had slipped in behind him. He curled the corner of his mouth in contempt, as if surveying a colony of ants, and with a lazy wave signaled his men to halt, while he continued the sacrificial rite as if it were a pleasant diversion. The other cloaked figures were unnervingly calm, their attention fixed entirely on the prone bodies on the floor. They gripped daggers whose blades flashed in the dim light and began to close in on the helpless people laid out like lambs for slaughter. "Stop!" Steve roared, lunging forward. A massive cloaked man stepped into his path and planted himself between Steve and the victims. Steve's heart tightened. The man, Johnson, was all broad shoulders and hard muscle. He raised his head, and in the flickering light his rough features looked savage. He grinned, white teeth set against dark skin. "Hey," Johnson said, almost cheerfully, "I'll take care of you." He swung a heavy shield. It traced a silver arc through the air and screamed toward Steve. Steve's pupils pinched. He twisted aside at the last instant. The shield missed him by inches, the rush of air flapping his coat. It slammed into the wall with a thunderous clang, embedding itself and sending plaster and dust raining down. Steve barely had time to breathe when a fist like a piston cracked past his ear. He hit the floor in a roll as that blow thundered through the spot he'd been standing in. The gust of the strike left him sweating. If he'd stopped the punch with his face, he'd be done for. He sprang back up, eyes flashing, and met Johnson's gaze. There was nothing playful left in the man's face, only ferocity. It was obvious Johnson intended to end this quickly and without mercy. Eddie's situation was even worse. He'd been confronted by two mysterious figures, one tall, one small. The tall one had already given herself away. Her long legs had been unmistakable. Amy peeled back her hood, revealing the familiar, beautiful face Eddie had hoped he'd never see in a place like this. "Don't look at me like I'm some heartless monster who abandoned you," she said, cold and hard. Eddie forced a shrug, trying to hide how badly his stomach had dropped. "Didn't you lie to me too?" His eyes flicked to the small form beside Amy. Half of an old, wrinkled face showed beneath the hood, familiar too in a different way. The bartender. He was here, and whatever secrecy he'd once wrapped himself in had vanished. Amy's expression twisted. She bristled as if insulted on principle. "Same? How is that the same? I worship the great gods. How could I be anything like a mortal like you?" She moved like a striking snake. Her dagger flashed in the low light, and she sprang forward with eyes blazing. The old bartender was a blur of motion as well, sudden, compact energy. The two of them closed on Eddie from both sides like shadows. Eddie's pulse thudded at his throat. He swallowed, forced his breath steady. Amy's blade slashed toward his neck. He spun, and the edge missed him by a hair. He answered with a punch aimed straight at her chest. She sneered, easily reading his move. Her left hand met his fist and stopped it as if it were nothing. Her body flowed, lithe and flexible, cat-like. Then a boot snapped up, and he doubled over as a foot slammed into his abdomen. Pain shot through him. He staggered back, nearly losing his balance. The bartender was a different kind of danger, small, coiled, and quick as a viper. He slipped in almost silently, dagger flashing. Before Eddie could reorient, the blade found him. Pain exploded across his side. His shirt darkened with blood. More stabs followed, slicing, cruel, and soon he was spattered, breath coming short and shallow. He stole a glance toward Steve, desperate for help. For a second, a swell of hope rose. Then it crashed as he watched the hulking Johnson hand Steve a brutal, crushing blow. Steve went down like a kite with a broken string, body slamming to the floor with a hollow thud. Eddie's chest dropped. Worse than his own wounds was what happened next. The cloaked attackers had stopped pretense and begun to butcher the innocent on the floor. Daggers found chests and throats. Each pull sent bright rivers of blood arsing across the stone and soaking the ground in crimson. "Damn it, Coulson, where are you? If you don't get in here, we're finished!" Eddie thought, mouth forcibly closed to keep the words in. As if the building itself answered, the far door exploded inward with a shower of splinters and a roar of heat. Shards flew through the smoke, and the blast lit everything in a harsh orange glow. The tang of burnt gunpowder stung the air. Coulson came through the doorway, flanked by a tide of SHIELD agents in black. They poured into the hall like a dark flood, weapons raised and moving with cold efficiency. "Everyone, stop," Coulson barked. Chapter 147, Beast Transformation. Coulson knew words alone were no match for gunfire, but the lights in the hall suddenly went out and everything went black. He couldn't risk shooting blindly. Steve and Eddie might be in the line of fire. He had to close the distance first. Steve was on the floor, one hand pressed to his chest, breathing hard. His voice was hoarse but steady. "Coulson, go help those people." "And me," Eddie cried, panic edging his words as if afraid he'd be left behind. Coulson followed Steve's pointing hand. His eyes gradually adjusted to the dark, and he made out bodies on the ground. The stench of blood hit him, and he felt his stomach drop. This was worse than he'd feared. He pushed forward with the agents behind him, but the cloaked men reacted faster. More than a dozen of them spun to face Coulson and the group rushing up the hall. They peeled back their cloaks and produced pistols that flashed coldly even in the dimness. Without hesitation, utterly indifferent to the risk of hitting their own, they opened fire. Gunfire shredded the silence. Coulson's pupils narrowed at the muzzle flashes. A wave of dread rolled through him. "Get down!" he shouted. Bullets came like rain. The shooters seemed to know exactly where everyone was, even in the dark. Agents were hit with pinpoint accuracy, screams burst out, and several fell, blood spreading across the floor. Pain and fear twisted their faces. Life felt suddenly impossibly fragile. Coulson reacted fast, hauling the surviving agents into cover. They upended tables and chairs to form makeshift shields and returned fire. Bullets whistled past ears, vibrating the air. The agents' training and weapons mattered. When they shot back, several cloaked men went down, thudding hard against the floor. Their bodies twitched, then lay still. So the mysterious attackers could be killed by bullets after all. The discovery shocked Steve. He'd assumed these figures were untouchable. "What are you thinking?" The Lord's mocking voice whispered in Steve's mind. "These guys are just rookies among rookies. They have almost no real power. Of course they're weak, much weaker than the one you're facing now." Steve didn't have time to answer. Johnson was already coming at him again, eyes burning with fury. The fall of his companion had ignited him. "You're not going to save your people?" he snarled. Steve dodged 2 heavy swings with as much lightness as he could manage, answering with a provocation he didn't feel. He didn't want to be tied up here. His priority was the innocent bystanders caught in this mess and stopping whatever plan the cloaked group had. Johnson ripped off his cloak, revealing a body that swelled before Steve's eyes. "Beast transformation," Johnson growled. Black hair erupted across his face, forearms, and chest like a spreading stain, thick and coarse. His muscles ballooned, the cords and ridges suddenly pronounced. His eyes narrowed into vertical, predatory slits that gleamed with a feral light. His breath went harsher. It was like standing in front of a wild animal. "I hunted a black bear for strength and a cheetah for speed," Johnson spat, voice deep and raw. "My power is beyond what a mortal like you can imagine. You can't get away. Prepare to die." He launched like a cannonball. Knees bent, then uncoiled. He flew in a brutal arc and crashed down to block Steve's path. Steve swallowed, eyes flicking to the shield embedded in the wall. If he could reach it, he still had a chance. Meanwhile, Eddie was trapped against a wall, breath coming hard. Coulson's arrival hadn't helped him. Instead, Amy and her companion's attack had intensified, and within minutes, Eddie had been driven into a corner. Amy licked her lips and smiled at him, cruel and hungry. "Go help kill those men in black," she purred to the bartender at her side. "I'll handle this one." The bartender glanced at Eddie, gave a slight nod, and melted back into the fray. Clearly, he trusted Amy to finish the job on her own. Amy stepped closer, delighted. "Okay," she said, tilting her head. "So, how would you like to die?" Eddie forced a smile, trying to keep the edge off his fear. Can I die in bed?" Her smile curdled into a sneer. "Sure, right after I cut you into pieces." On the other side of the hall, the cloaked leader wore a frown of impatience. The group was stuck. These ordinary people were putting up a fight, and things weren't going their way. He turned to a small figure beside him. "Louise," he said, voice tight, "go take care of those annoying people." "Yes," Louise answered. She lifted her head. The angel-winged costume made her face look almost childlike and innocent. She walked to the center of the group, and as everyone gave her room, opened her mouth. One by one, the cloaked men reached into their pockets and jammed something into their ears. Then Louise began to sing, a clear, beautiful song that floated through the dark hall like a knife wrapped in silk. Chapter 148, Singing. The ethereal, pleasant singing cut across the crack and thunder of gunfire like a clear spring breaking out in the middle of a battlefield. Coulson's eyes flickered. He recognized the melody, an old lullaby, soft as a mother's whisper. The notes caressed his ears, and a dangerous drowsiness crept up on him. His eyelids grew heavy, his focus threatened to slide away. Wrong, he thought. This song wasn't harmless, it was hypnotic. He forced himself to stay awake. Around him, the agents collapsed one by one into even, peaceful sleep. Coulson felt the pressure of it, like a physical thing, pulling at his thoughts. He wrenched himself upright, pressed the muzzle to his forearm, and fired. The hot bullet grazed his skin, leaving a bright red line. Pain sliced through the haze and cleared his head. He ground his teeth and forced his attention back to the room. No time to hesitate. He fired several rounds into the darkness beyond the doorway. The bullets whistled, and the cloaked figures that had been inching forward recoiled. Still, the sleepiness was like a venomous serpent, slow, insidious, growing stronger with every blink. Everything went slightly out of focus. Coulson's forehead was slick with cold sweat as he wrestled with dwindling clarity. He had to find a way to stop it, and fast. Fighting a godlike power with mortal will was like trying to walk in quicksand. Every effort sank him deeper. The singing didn't just stay in his ears. It spread through the hall like a visible wave, as if every note had its own speaker, swelling louder and crystal clear until it seemed to jump and shimmer in the air. Nearby, Eddie and Amy were in the middle of a lethal struggle. Their eyes were hard with intent when the song reached them. Amy's face changed. She knew this music. She had heard its dangerous power before. Even a high priest could fall under it if exposed too long. Her gaze flicked to Eddie, and an idea formed. If she could just plug his ears, the effect would be greatly reduced. But she didn't move to block him. Instead, she sneered, confident. "That woman's singing won't touch me," she thought. Her own strange powers would let her hold on longer than Eddie. A ruthless look came into her eyes. She decided to finish him first, then block his ears. With a sudden lunge, dagger flashing, she attacked. Eddie's vision blurred, his reactions slowed. He struggled to focus, and with effort, barely managed to dodge Amy's strike. The melody coiled around their minds like an invisible net, tightening. Amy's desperation hardened into resolve. She had to kill him before the lullaby took her. But she didn't notice her movements losing speed. Slowly, Eddie's actions steadied. He dropped his eyes briefly, hiding a strange light in them. For a moment, he seemed to stagger, then he set his jaw and surged again. Amy's face brightened, her hope flared, and she drove the dagger forward. At the last instant, Eddie slipped aside. He moved with sudden, lethal efficiency, like a phantom closing on her from behind. Amy watched in shock as he wrenched the dagger from her hand. With a surge of power she hadn't expected, he sliced across the back of her neck. Blood bloomed and spread. Amy's eyes widened in disbelief. "No, this can't be. How are you not affected by the song?" Eddie exhaled. "I've had chronic insomnia for years. Lullabies don't work on me." "Insomnia?" Amy slumped to the floor, eyes open and unseeing. But insomnia wasn't the whole story. A low, gravelly murmur, something Eddie had been doing for a long time, the restless vocal tick born of sleepless nights, rose up then and interfered with the singer's melody, blunting its effect on him. He looked down at Amy and for a moment felt something complicated at killing such a beautiful woman. He didn't have time to dwell. Using the last of his strength in a single burst, he emptied himself. His body went limp. He dropped to his knees and then to the floor, exhausted. "The rest is up to you, Captain," he whispered. Steve felt the song too, harder than most. It was worse for him than for Johnson. Johnson's beastly form, his wildness, made him less susceptible. Sensing Steve's faltering resistance, Johnson seized him, clamping his powerful arms around Steve and squeezing until Steve's bones rattled. The pain drove the drowsiness back for a moment. Steve fought like a man drowning and gasping for air. "Ha ha! Don't struggle. I'll just squeeze you into a meat patty." Johnson crowed, arrogant. Steve gritted his teeth and shouted inward, "Hey, Holy Lord, how long are you going to watch this?" A voice answered, light and teasing. "Oh, you can't keep up any longer? I thought you'd last a while." Steve felt fear, then resolve. He might have hung on a bit longer, but he worried about Coulson and the others. They couldn't hold out much longer. Aloud, he said, "Okay, then come in." In the next instant, a hot, wicked power burst from deep inside him and spread through his body like wildfire. Pain and fury tangled until he could barely breathe. Scales like dense green armor crawled over the right side of his face. His eyes, once bright, went blood red and slit like a snake's, icy and merciless. His right hand twisted, his fingers bowed, and knife-sharp claws burst from his fingertips, gleaming coldly. A violent wave of energy exploded outward, slamming Johnson backward several meters and sending him crashing to the floor. Steve lifted his head. In his expression there was a new, terrible arrogance, an indomitable majesty, as if the whole world bowed beneath him. "Big guy," he said, voice transformed and laced with menace. "Who did you just say you were going to kill?" Chapter 149, The Holy Lord Appears. A sudden, overwhelming aura burst from Steve and swept through the building like a furious storm. The force was almost tangible, pressing so hard on the air that it grew heavy. Everyone in the hall froze. Johnson, the closest, took the brunt of it. He felt something ancient and majestic explode out of Steve, like a long, dormant leviathan rousing itself, an irresistible oppression that made his instincts scream danger. It was as if a prime predator had materialized out of nowhere. Johnson's heart hammered, cold sweat beaded on his brow, his legs went weak, and he collapsed where he stood. Every motion left him trembling, even breathing felt like too much. The cloaked men who had stepped forward to finish off the unconscious agent shook visibly. The knives in their hands quivered. Louise stopped singing, her frosty expression flickering for the first time. Even the leader of the cloaks, the high priest of the church overseeing South America, couldn't hide his reaction. He sucked in a sharp breath and clenched his fist so hard the fabric of his cloak strained. Awe and a nameless fear rose in him. Although this force was far less than the one his lord wielded, it carried the same transcendent antiquity. It could not belong to any ordinary human. It felt like an ancient being returned from myth and rumor, an impossible thing lodged inside a living body. The high priest's voice was low and shaky as he thought, "This isn't human." He had been given the god of chaos's favor and knew more of those matters than anyone there. The sight of such an existence springing from a man rattled him. Would it ruin his plans? He did not know. But stopping now was out of the question. He turned his head slightly and watched the bright red blood pooling and tracing thin streams across the floor. His knuckles whitened around his fists. The veins on his forearms stood out like gnarled roots. "I will not let anyone stand between me and pleasing the gods," he swore inwardly. Coulson fought to keep what little consciousness he had. His vision swam, but he forced his head to turn and saw Steve, someone who looked different, whose manner was transformed. A shock of realization hit him. This was no longer the Steve he knew. It was the being from the strange parchment, the Holy Lord, temperamental and terrible. Coulson's fingers trembled around the cold metal of the grenade in his hand. For a beat he considered it, then slowly released his grip. If this mysterious saint had appeared, perhaps he no longer needed to risk blowing them all to pieces. A long sigh escaped him as the last of his resistance ebbed. Sleep rolled over him like a tide. His sight went black and his consciousness sank away. When he fell into that darkness, the man on his feet, no, the Holy Lord, smirked. An elusive light flickered in his eyes. "Huh," he said under his breath. It's been a while since I've had a full body. This feels good. He closed his hand and felt it take on the shape of a dragon's claw. Joy, cold and feral, filled him. Inside the void of Steve's own mind, consciousness drifted in a dismal, hollow place. It was a blackness so complete even breath seemed muffled. Two dim windows served as the only glimpses of the outside world. Steve could have fought to reclaim his body, could have fought the Holy Lord clawing for control, but he did not. He gave himself over. It was a gamble. If the Holy Lord betrayed him, if he did something that hurt Steve or humanity, Steve would be responsible. He might become the one who doomed everyone. But there was no alternative. He forced himself to calm the storm in his chest and hold on to the belief that surrendering was the only way to save those around him. Maybe this was the last hope. A thought, half plea, half jest, echoed in his head. Hey, Holy Lord, stop sighing and go save people. The Holy Lord chuckled, the sound like iron on stone, and shook his head. His right eye gleamed a mocking crimson. Sorry, Steve, I'm better at killing than saving. It's been so long that I should at least say hello. He stepped forward. The motion looked casual, but it struck like a hammer, shattering the composure of everyone present. Invisible pressure gathered in the air, making lungs ache as if an invisible hand clamped the chests of the onlookers. At his feet, a complex magic circle bloomed. Runes flashed, coiling and writhing like living things. Then blast after blast of searing flame erupted from the circle, as if a gate to some hellish furnace had opened. The heat hit them and forced people to stumble back. The flames shot up and took shape, first a towering, furious pillar, then the full form of a fire dragon. Its scales glinted like molten metal. Each scale hummed with heat and light. Flames burned in its eyes with ruthless intent. When it opened its mouth, hot breath and the scent of singed air poured out, an oppressive, choking odor. The dragon circled in the air and roared with such force that the walls seemed to tremble. It felt as if the creature wanted to rend the whole world. The Holy Lord stood astride the dragon's back, calm and imperious like a monarch surveying his realm. His gaze was ice itself, cool and dismissive. Everyone stared, stunned into both terror and reverence. In that heavy silence, the high priest spoke, his voice low and urgent. Do not be frightened by him. In this world, only our Lord is eternal and invincible. Under the protection of our Lord, our existence will not be erased. Even if our bodies perish now, we will return in our true forms one day. Nothing is real. Only chaos is eternal. Praise our Lord. The cloaks echoed, their fear transmuted into fanatic devotion. Humph, a pack of lunatics, the Holy Lord sneered. All right, let me have some fun, he said. At his word, the fire dragon roared and descended in a deadly dive toward Johnson, who was nearest. Chapter 150. Fire Mage. Roar. At the Holy Lord's flick of a finger, the enormous fire dragon unleashed a deafening roar and dove straight for Johnson, who stood closest. Its fangs and claws were bared. Flames writhed along its scales like living serpents, and its hot breath set the air shimmering. Johnson felt inspiration surge through him. No fear, only a fierce light in his eyes. The corners of his mouth lifted into a crazed smile, as if what he welcomed was not death, but some terrible honor. One thought echoed through him. Everything is for the Lord God. He charged, muscles coiled, veins bulging, and threw a punch with house-destroying force. His fist cleaved the hot air and struck the dragon's chest. The impact made the flames flutter like ripples across a pond. For a moment, it seemed the dragon's fire wavered, but this falter was almost nothing against such a beast. The dragon roared, opened its bloody maw, and swallowed Johnson whole. A piercing scream ripped through the hall as his body vanished into the flames. The dragon's eyes glinted with contempt, as if mocking such a tiny, pointless resistance. All that remained was the afterglow and the echo of that dying cry. Johnson's death did not inspire retreat. If anything, it inflamed the fanaticism of the followers. They surged like a swarm of mad bees toward the fallen Holy Lord. Louise's eyes went hard. A deep black light flashed through them. Whispering obscure abyssal words, she lifted an index finger and breathed, darkness. A living black mist condensed and shot toward the Holy Lord's face, smothering his vision in instant pitch. You dare think you can blind me? The Holy Lord sneered. A scarlet flare burned in his eyes, cutting through the black fog as if it were nothing. The counterspell struck back at Louise, She was hit by a violent backlash. Blood spurted from her eyes and nostrils. She clutched her head and screamed, her body trembling. Her sacrifice, however, had bought enough time for the high priest to finish his preparations. A white-hot flaming spear appeared in the high priest's hand. The flames writhed like a living thing, radiating oppressive heat. "Now!" he shouted, and hurled the spear straight at the Holy Lord. At the same time, he wove his hands and called more fire into being. Fireballs condensed and contorted midair, becoming fire crows, fiery birds that shrieked and launched themselves like a storm of burning spears. The Holy Lord's smile vanished. He snapped his fingers, and the summoned fire dragon wheeled to shield him, claws raking. The dragon intercepted the spear with a crushing blow. Boom! The clash detonated with titanic force. Waves of flame blasted outward, shattering glass as fire snakes lanced through the broken windows. The fire crows, undeterred, plunged into the conflagration and set off further explosions. Cloaked men who had been rushing forward were thrown back. Chaos erupted. The blast surged toward the high priest, but an invisible barrier seemed to divert most of its force. The flames licked around him, but he remained standing, eyes fixed on the heart of the explosion, every nerve strung tight. He belonged to the hunter path, jealousy among the 7 deadly sins, and he was a sequence 7 fire mage. He could command fire, though not summon a dragon of the Holy Lord's caliber. He had gambled that the ancient creature had not yet fully recovered its strength. As the flames died down, the Holy Lord stepped out of the smoke unharmed. The dragon that had protected him was gone. The high priest couldn't conceal his joy. So he hadn't regained his full power, he muttered. The Holy Lord's face tightened into frost. That doesn't change anything. You're still finished. The high priest laughed confidently. Finish me? I can control fire just as you can. You won't touch me. Oh, the Holy Lord's voice dropped and grew majestic as he began to chant ancient arcane syllables. In 2 seconds, the floor before him bulged and split. From the rupture rose 2-meter-tall monsters, stone-bodied creatures with dragon heads and human torsos. Their cement faces burned with red eyes and a terrible, malignant aura. Go, kill them all, the Holy Lord ordered. The dragon-headed golems charged, grinning, toward the cloaked men who had been scattered by the blast. Steve, crouched in a small dark room nearby, stared in disbelief. He had not expected the battle to explode into anything like this. The high priest's face, meanwhile, darkened. He raised his voice and cried, "Now is the time to sacrifice your lives for the gods. Go, bring these sinners down. The gods will remember our devotion." The cloaked men, some now aflame with a fanatic rage, turned on the charging golems with ferocity. The high priest watched with a faint, pleased curl to his mouth. Almost there, he thought. Just a little more. When the 2 forces met, the cloaked men paid the price. Most were novices who had only recently gained strange powers. Against concrete-bodied dragon men immune to bullets and blades, they stood little chance. Heavy casualties fell on their side. And still, the high priest stood rooted in the center of the hall, unmoving. Steve, from his vantage, pieced the scene together. Something was wrong. The high priest had deliberately allowed his followers to be cut down. He meant to stage a blood sacrifice. That was the only reason for such cruelty. Of course, the Holy Lord sneered from across the hall, as if reacting to Steve's realization. He planned to trade the lives of his men for the gods' favor. He used them as offerings. Steve shouted back, incredulous. "If you knew, why didn't you stop him?" "What could I do?" the Holy Lord replied. "That last spell drained me. I told you to help me regain my strength, but you refused. Now look, I'm at a disadvantage." Steve hesitated, unconvinced. Teeth clenched, he snapped, "Next time, I'll help you recover your strength. Stop him now." The Holy Lord's chuckle was low. "Very well. I suppose I can accept that, for now." His scarlet eyes slid to the high priest. At once, the golems that had been cutting a swath through the cloaked men paused. Their red eyes flashed, and as if obeying the Holy Lord's silent command, they turned and charged, away from the slaughter and straight toward the high priest. The hall froze as steel met stone. Chapter 151, Blood Sacrifice. Facing the invulnerable dragon beasts, the cloaked cultists fell into despair. The creatures were like demons from the depths, bodies sheathed in thick, stone-like scales, eyes glinting with a cold light, and claws sharp as the scythe of death. Any cultist who tried to resist was torn apart. Blood sprayed in crimson arcs through the air and ran across the ground, staining the battlefield red. Their cloaks shredded, the followers' true faces were exposed. Men and women, old and young, ordinary people who, before joining the cult of chaos, might have lived quiet lives. But hunger for power, beauty, immortality, and divinity had twisted them into zealots. That included the old barkeeper who once had been quick enough to outpace Eddie. Now his speed meant nothing. He felt the claws pierce him, felt the all-consuming pain as life spilled out. He fell, blood gushing like a fountain. He had watched that crimson flow so many times in others. Now it was his turn. A look of relief and release crossed his face, perhaps because deep down he was tired of the endless pursuit and killing. All that blood ran between the flagstones and seeped into the ground. Except for the high priest, none of them knew about the secret chamber beneath the courtyard. At its center stood a human-shaped statue with no face. Instead, 7 strange sigils were carved across its form. If Parker had seen it, he would have recognized the web-like mark on the statue's chest, the same pattern he bore on his own body. Blood continued to drip down into a basin before the statue. With each drop, the statue began to glow a strange, dawning red, as if an unknown power were waking. The high priest felt the change through the floor, and a hidden delight crossed his features beneath the hood. Soon, he whispered to himself, we will gain the god's attention. Then one of the dragon beasts, at the Holy Lord's command, swung its direction and thundered toward the high priest's position. Its heavy steps shook the earth like the approach of an army. The priest's face tightened. He had watched the others fight. He knew how difficult these monsters were. Even he could not afford to squander power recklessly. There was no sense wasting strength on them at this moment. He had to reserve it for whatever greater thing would follow. Besides the creatures, there was another threat he had reason to fear. His eyes fell on Louise, seated beside him. The backlash of a failed spell had left her nearly spent. She had retreated here to recover. She looked up and smiled faintly when she noticed the high priest's attentive stare. I understand, she said. For the sake of the gods, I am willing to give everything. You have my word, Father. Call me high priest, he corrected, voice flat. The gods and I have seen your devotion. We will resurrect you later and send you back to serve. All right, high priest. Louise turned to face the oncoming horde, but a mocking curl touched her lips. Her body blurred as she shifted, but she didn't charge forward. Instead, she stepped past the priest, reached behind her, and with a quick motion, hurled 2 small spheres at him. The priest's pupils narrowed. He had not expected that. He tried to dodge, but it was too late. Both spheres detonated in a low, concussive blast at his feet, the pressure throwing him more than 10 meters and right into the waiting mass of dragon beasts. At the same time, a crimson light welled up from the fragments, cutting through the smoke like a blade and sinking into the priest's body. The effect was instant. He shuddered as if struck by lightning. The fierce clarity in his eyes softened into confusion, then a heavy drowsiness. The counterattack he had been shaping slid away from him. The dragons paid him no heed as anything but fresh prey. They lunged. A claw slammed into his chest and carved him open. Under the severing, searing pain, his eyes cleared for a heartbeat, and he stared at Louise in disbelief. You aren't Sequence 8, he croaked. When did you rise? Not long ago, Louise replied, a proud smile on her face. Father, you'd never have believed how much favor the gods have shown me. The sleeping works I used, that too, was a gift from them. You said you would give everything to the gods. Even me, the high priest managed. His chest heaved, a fresh cough tore blood from his lips. He tried to rise, to speak more, but a dragon's talon flung him aside like refuse. The once revered man lay crumpled among the dead, his blood seeping into the cracks between the stones. I want to grow stronger. I want to become a god. How can I die here? His vision blurred. As darkness crept in, one last, unexpected image filled his mind. A smiling little girl, 7 or 8 years old, flinging herself into his arms. Dad, Dad, she had called, innocent and bright. He had once told her that he would give everything to the gods. Louise's face softened for a single, bitter second as the high priest fell quiet, but her relief quickly hardened into triumphant joy. Her plan had worked. She would usurp his place and stand nearest the Lord God. She would be favored, bathed in divine gifts. "Ha ha, what a wonderful play," the Holy Lord applauded, amused. "This is not a surprise, but a tragedy," murmured Steve, sorrow heavy in his tone. "Holy Lord, please, let the dragon forces strike quickly. I don't want that man to succeed." "It's too late," the Holy Lord replied, a note of resignation in his voice. For the blood of the mysterious Sequence 7 held a power far greater than the others. As the drops landed on the statue, the red light erupted, blinding and absolute. It punched through the thick earth and the chamber above, rock and mortar shredded by a beam of crimson that shot straight into the sky and scattered the clouds. The entire field was washed in red. The moon itself seemed to redden, glowing like a blood moon. The world around them turned to a single burning color. Louise could no longer hide her expression. Her innocent mask crumpled into one of rapture. "I can feel it," she whispered, voice trembling. "This is the gods' gaze. The gods are looking at me." Chapter 152, Seizing Food from the Tiger's Mouth. A column of red light stabbed into the sky like a blade. It was so bright you couldn't look at it directly, and it was visible from miles away. Banner spread his wings and rose into the air, fixing his gaze on the sudden, furious pillar. Anger flared in his eyes, but beneath it, a quieter fear had crept in and tempered the rage. The feeling was unmistakable. "This is the power of the god of chaos," he muttered, much stronger than before. Memories came unbidden. Months ago, while hiding from General Ross in a quiet town, Banner had been visited by a strange man who called himself the Archbishop of Sloth. He had subdued Banner without brutality and made a single demand, that Banner accept the title of Archbishop of Wrath and let the stranger help control the Hulk so he would stop hurting those he loved. It struck the softest place in Banner's heart. He was tired of being a monster, tired of living apart from people he cared for. He agreed. He had never seen the god of chaos directly, only the breath of something godlike, but that trace of divinity was enough to awe him. What other being could carry such an all-encompassing, majestic aura? With the god of chaos's grace, his nightmares had receded. He still felt anger, but not the uncontrollable, destructive rage that had haunted him. He also gained a dangerous new ability, to materialize anger, his own or others, a power that grew without limit as the anger intensified. The change had shown him how vulnerable earthly authorities were in the face of such power. He could appear openly now, and nothing could easily stop him. "I'll go back to America and take back what's mine," Banner resolved silently. But first, he had work to do here. He took a steadying breath and looked at the distant pillar of light. He didn't want a direct clash with the god of chaos's followers, but he couldn't stand by and let them turn this quiet town into a war zone. He had warned them once. They had only restrained themselves briefly before setting this catastrophe in motion. His warning had been too light. "I'll make them know who really rules this city," he vowed. Without hesitation, Banner beat his wings and streaked toward the beam like a blue bolt of lightning, vanishing into the night. "This power is terrifying up close," a voice said. Inside a dim hall, the Holy Lord extended a dragon-like clawed arm into the crimson wash and felt the energy sweep across him. He breathed out in amazed apprehension. In a small back room, Steve watched him with a tightening sense of dread. If the ritual succeeded, the casualties would be catastrophic. Not dozens, but potentially tens of thousands. "Holy Lord, you still have power. Can't you use it?" Steve pleaded silently. "Fight? With what?" the Holy Lord asked softly, shaking his head. "Steve, you don't understand the situation. This isn't about spoiling someone else's ritual. It's whether they will spare us at all. I have enough strength left only to survive. Do you think we still hold the advantage?" "Where are your dragon puppets?" Steve asked. The Holy Lord turned so Steve could see the ruined constructs. Their once living scales had calcified into cement and stone, cracking beneath the red light. "Don't imagine these beams are mere spectacle. They're godly power, and they purge other forces. If I get too close, I'll be purged too." "So, we can only watch?" Steve said. "Yes, just watch." He'd barely finished speaking when the red pillar before Louise shivered and condensed into a blood-red door. Louise fell to her knees, forehead pressed to the ground, sobbing with piety. "Follower Louise, thanks the Lord for this blessing," she cried. The bloody door opened with a horrible grace. A brilliant scarlet beam poured out and wrapped around her. Instantly, warmth and a vast, inexhaustible force flooded into her, knitting her wounds closed and replenishing the fragile reserve of power in her body. She screamed as an invisible hand lifted her and set her facing the doorway. A soft internal snap seemed to mark the change. She, who had only recently broken through a barrier, now surged past it again. Power swelled inside her like an ocean rising. As the energy continued to pour into Louise, a shadow lunged from behind. It was Eddie, who'd been beaten down and exhausted moments earlier, eyes bright with a desperate hunger. He thought if he could steal even a fraction of that divine blessing, his fortunes would be remade. So against all caution, he risked everything and plunged into the light. Strangely, the repelling force surrounding the Lord's blessing did not cast him out. Eddie shattered into the column and siphoned some of the bestowal into himself. No, Louise's scream cut like glass. She had no power to move and could only let out a piercing wail. The sound struck Eddie like a physical blow. He coughed up blood, but even blood could not dull his craving. He sniffed the air like a starving dog, greedier than before. The Holy Lord laughed aloud. "Steve, your companion dares to steal another god's gift. He's dead." Steve watched, breath tight in his chest, unwilling to shout caution or interfere. From his place in the dark, he could only hope. Eddie's gamble might be fatal, but perhaps, if luck favored them, it might also be the turning point they needed. Chapter 153, Losing Control. If looks could kill, Eddie would have been dead a dozen times over. But Louise's danger didn't lie in her glare. It was her voice. She had already tried sonic attacks again and again with no success, so she abandoned them and focused on siphoning power from the column of light. Her body, though, was in no shape for it. The force pouring in was not only immense but chaotic, foreign to her system. It tortured and thrilled her at once. Every inch of skin trembled, every nerve felt like it was on fire. Pain and something like pleasure wrestled inside her, and she had to dedicate all her will to surviving it. There was no strength left to watch Eddie. Eddie, on the other hand, stood in the beam and felt only warmth at first, old injuries knitting themselves closed, pain ebbing away as the light healed him. Then the power began to pour knowledge into him, complex images, patterns, ideas flooding his mind. Enlightenment came in fragments through his half-open eyes. He finally understood why the assassin's potion hadn't been rejected by his body. The concoction had been infused with the power of the god of chaos. It made sense. If the cloaked men hadn't all died and had instead remained to receive the gift, they could have shared it. Then Louise screamed. He turned at the sound and saw something that made his stomach drop. Under her exposed skin, it looked like countless insects crawled and shifted. The surface of her body bulged into uneven bumps. A split opened in the fabric of her clothes across her back with a wet, tearing sound, and a deformed arm, thick with black hair, extended from her shoulder blade. Cracks webbed across her face, and tumorous growths that resembled extra eyes began to sprout, horrifying, too many to count. It was like a nightmare made flesh. The instant Eddie looked at those new, staring eyes, a heavy burst of pain hammered his skull as if struck by a sledge. He shut his eyes to escape it. The healing light pulled him back from the edge, but the shock clung to him. "What the hell is happening?" he thought. "Is she a monster now? Am I next?" Worse followed. The whispering, nightmarish, unintelligible murmurs returned, louder and closer than before. His head felt as though an electric drill had started up inside it, grinding and grinding until he couldn't help but scream. Standing off to the side, the Holy Lord watched with a grim sort of satisfaction. "Ha!" he said aloud. "This is not something humans were made to withstand." "Sir, what happens if they can't?" Steve demanded, voice tight with worry. The Holy Lord chuckled. "If the body breaks, the best outcome is an immediate death. Otherwise," his voice softened, almost pitying, "you lose control and become a screaming, raving monster. Eternal torment." Steve felt his breath catch. The idea of transformation into something mad and damned made his skin crawl. He hoped desperately that Eddie could hold on. Minutes stretched like years. At last, the beam from the blood gate began to thin. The column of blood-red light faded until the gate closed with a final, echoing finish. For an instant, within the closing portal, Steve thought he glimpsed impossible shapes and colors. The gate and the towering light winked out together, and without the pillar's support, Eddie and Louise collapsed to the ground. But they did not fall the same way. A violent aura exploded outward from Louise, driving Eddie back like a gust of wind. The innocent girl he had known was gone. What remained was monstrous. Two long, sinewy arms covered in tough black hair had emerged from her back like spider limbs. Her hair lengthened, black strands whipping behind her like a nest of snakes. Her eyes were a furious, feverish red. Around them clustered dozens of slim alien eyes embedded in her skin. Steve made a small, involuntary noise. "Holy Lord, has she lost control?" "Not yet," the Holy Lord said. He watched Louise with very faint curiosity and a trace of amusement. "But it's close. She'll tip over soon. That boy, he's lucky to have resisted as long as he did." Eddie's vision cleared, but terror still glinted in his eyes. He scrambled up without a word and took a few steps toward the Holy Lord, scanning the man's form. The Holy Lord's pupils had constricted oddly. For a heartbeat, Eddie's stomach flipped. "Has even the captain been changed?" he thought, alarm rising. He didn't wait to find out. He backed away from the two monstrous figures as fast as he could. Louise's many eyes snapped suddenly to him. Recognition flared. She remembered him as the thief who had taken her divine gift. Rage swooped in, and she screamed. A powerful wave of sound exploded from her mouth, an invisible force that slammed into Eddie like a freight truck. Pain lanced through him. He tasted blood and coughed it out. He crumpled to his knees, curling inward. The sonic assault didn't just batter his body. It crashed through his skull and rattled his mind, setting off a chorus of mad whispering that echoed in his thoughts. The old enigmatic murmurs returned, louder and more insistent than before. Eddie tried to scream, and his face cracked in places as if glass had broken, revealing raw red flesh beneath. The agony was impossible to bear. The sonic wave washed on and reached the Holy Lord. For a moment it began to batter him, but a sudden shield of fire flared into being around him and stopped the attack in its tracks. Seeing that, Steve shouted, panicked, "Eddie, Holy Lord, do something! Save him!" "Young man, hush," the Holy Lord snapped, impatient. "Shouting won't help. You're useless. Don't pretend otherwise. Sit down and stop trying to command me." Steve had no answer. He felt the hot, helpless anger of someone who had to watch and could do nothing. He clenched his fists until his nails bit into his palms. Louise's assault had not ended. She curled her fingers inward, and ghostly, translucent figures began to coalesce around her, phantasms of the recently dead. Familiar faces drifted among them. The high priest, Amy, people who had only just died. They were undead spirits summoned to do her bidding, and they turned as one toward Eddie, their hands reaching to tear him apart and feed. Then a crash split the air. A section of the building exploded outward, sending debris flying. A bright, furious green light cut into the room, and a figure hung in the hole like a living meteor, looking down at the blood-soaked scene below. His expression was pure, white-hot rage. "Damn you all!" Banner shouted as he hovered, every inch of him coiled with fury. Steve's heart dropped when he recognized the man who had just broken in. He had almost forgotten that Bruce Banner had close ties to the church. Now he couldn't tell if Banner had come as an ally or a deadly enemy. His thoughts tangled, but his eyes were fixed on Banner, searching for any clue in the man's movements. Banner's entrance betrayed overwhelming power. He had descended slowly from the sky. The rush of air beneath his feet raised dust, and the atmosphere around him seemed to press down under his momentum. If Banner had come to help the church, everyone there would be in grave danger. Louise, who had been close to losing control, went completely frantic at the sight of Banner's landing. Terror, a terror that bordered on madness, twisted her face. Her spirit recoiled from the murderous aura Banner radiated. That instinctive, terrified warning only drove her further into frenzy. She lifted her head and let out a raw animal roar. The undead that had been closing on Eddie swerved as if pulled by a tether and poured toward Banner instead. They moved like a black cloud, cold and hungry. Banner stared, startled. He had never seen anything quite like these insubstantial, illusory creatures. As a scientist who devoured his share of sci-fi and fantasy films, he quickly formed a hypothesis. "Ghosts," he murmured, more curious than afraid. "Fascinating. Worth studying." Then he recognized faces among them. To his shock, the high priest stood there in spirit form. He's dead? Banner's brow knit. He had assumed the high priest had presided over the sacrificial rite in person and intended to hold him accountable. Seeing him among the dead made no sense. Banner looked toward Louise and realized with a frown that she was the high priest's underage daughter. Only two figures still stood solid on the field, Louise and the Holy Lord, whose body was plated with scales. The Holy Lord's aura of corruption made Banner visibly uncomfortable, an evil that seemed to worm into the soul. Banner gave up trying to puzzle it out. "Forget talk," he said, cold. "I'll kill you both." He thrust out a hand. Angry power poured from him and took shape, razor-sharp, palm-length spikes that sprouted across the ceiling like a forest of jagged teeth. The metal-cold flashes of those spikes carried a single message: death. Steve stared in awe and horror. What kind of ability was this? The Holy Lord's face went grave. "He's targeting us, too," he said. Banner flicked his fingers. The spikes fell in a cascading rain and split into two streams. One swept toward the Holy Lord, the other tore through the attacking undead. Some of the more fragile spirits simply dissipated under the onslaught. Others were badly wounded, their forms growing thin and translucent. The spikes, born of Banner's anger, chewed through many of them, leaving the rest only partially intact. Most of the remaining spikes expended their power and posed no real threat to Louise, though she looked shaken and humiliated rather than defeated. Her lips peeled back into a snarl. New, tumor-like eyes appeared across her face, and she snapped at Banner. The Holy Lord fared worse. He threw up a ring of flame as a shield, but the falling spikes battered it, sending sparks and shrieks of metal and fire into the air like miniature explosions. "Kid, I did what I could," he said quietly. "This one's a monster. I won't win without my strength." He met Steve's eyes. "The rest is on you." Steve's heart lurched. He opened his mouth to ask what he meant. The world swam. When his vision steadied, he saw the fire shield collapse and the endless spikes bearing down on him. In that instant, the Holy Lord did the impossible. He relinquished control of the body he'd been holding and returned it to Steve. Steve had no time to curse the betrayal. The spikes struck him. Pain ripped through his chest as they pierced flesh. He was hurled several meters into the air and slammed down hard. Blood sprayed. Wave after wave of agony washed over him. His limbs felt leaden, warmth seeping away. Then, as if from a distant ember, a heat swelled in his chest, banishing the cold and bringing a sliver of relief. He thought angrily of the Holy Lord. "You coward! You ran from the fight." "No," the Holy Lord shot back in his mind, defensive and almost proud. "It's a strategic retreat, something I picked up from abroad." Steve's retort dissolved into a curse he didn't have the strength to voice. Everything blurred at the edges. He wondered stupidly if he was about to die. And then Banner turned his attention from him to the only remaining target, Louise. "So you've given yourself over to madness," Banner said. "I'll give you a way out." He raised his hand again. Spikes filled the air, more numerous and faster this time, raining down like a white storm. Louise's eyes flashed with a momentary, terrified clarity. There was no time to think. She screamed and lunged, seizing at the spirit of the high priest. "Father, save me," she cried. The high priest's spirit was the most potent among the undead. Even grievously damaged, he was stronger than the others. At her plea, his essence tightened into a meteor and plunged into Louise. Her whole demeanor shifted. She vaulted upright and flung her arms wide. Suddenly, flames erupted around her and condensed into a flock of fiery crows. They screamed as one and dove toward the falling spikes. Greenish spirit energy met crimson flame in a collision so violent that it seemed to rent the air. For a breathless moment, there was nothing but a shuddering silence, then a cataclysmic explosion like the heavens splitting open. The building above them fractured. Fire roared outward, devouring everything. The night turned blood red. The whole neighborhood became a molten, roaring inferno. The air filled with the smell of burning wood and scorched flesh, and the world became a blazing hell. Chapter 155. Escape. The ruined building split open in a blaze of green light. When the dust settled, Banner stepped out from the wreckage. A cold light flashed in his eyes. The materialized armor clung to him, reflecting the moon. The explosion had folded around him, and though the structure collapsed, he stood unscathed. He looked down at the rubble and frowned. Did she get away? His voice was low and dangerously calm, threaded with anger and disbelief. Louise had used the blast to slip away by some secret means. She hadn't died. Banner's displeasure was plain, but there was nothing he could do to pursue her here. If there were any other mysterious figures in the city, they were now gone, and there was no need for him to remain. He stared northward, eyes hardened as if riveted to some distant, lost home. A fierce sense of purpose rose in him. It was time to go back and reclaim what was his. Sirens began to wail in the distance. Without another moment's hesitation, massive wings of light unfurled behind him. He launched into the night and vanished into the cloud-scattered sky. Minutes later, police cars, fire crews, and ambulances swarmed the scene to comb the wreckage for survivors, searching for whatever life might have been left behind. Several kilometers away, in a narrow alley, Louise leaned against a wall. She spat a mouthful of black blood onto the cobbles, something writhing and hair-like within it. Her face was ashen, her eyes hollowed with pain and exhaustion. Unlike Banner, she had no armor to shield her. The blast had caught her during her escape. One of the wicked, arm-like appendages that had sprouted from her back was broken, long strands of her black hair were singed away, and many of the tumorous extra eyes on her skin had shut or glazed over. She felt weak, but somehow that weakness was a small mercy. She had nearly lost herself to the surge of alien power. The explosive backlash had burned off a portion of the excess and, terrifyingly, snapped her back from the brink. Fear and regret flooded her. She had almost been killed by that enraged archbishop. Panic seized her. On trembling knees, she scraped the ground for the writhing black hair and pressed it to her lips. "Lord God," she whispered, voice shaking, "it's my fault. I'm useless, unable to handle what you've given me. I failed you. I failed your trust." She swallowed the slick, writhing strands. When she straightened, her expression had cooled, numbness receding and a hard edge forming where despair had been. The chaos-infused power still throbbed in her veins. The gift, no, the burden, bestowed by the gods, had pushed her up 2 levels. She had become a Sequence 5 spiritual witch. The force inside her was immense. Without Eddie having taken some of the strain, she might have wholly lost herself and become something inhuman. Her lips curled in a contemptuous smile. Eddie could also absorb the god's power. Perhaps he, too, could be a devotee. If he chose to devote himself fully in the future, she thought, she might forgive him. With that, she flicked him aside, like a spent rag. Her priorities were clear. She needed to use her methods to purge and stabilize the divine power, master her new witch abilities, and never succumb again. The core skill of a spiritual witch was control of spirits. Louise inhaled, then expelled a nearly transparent apparition, an undead spirit, the remnant of the high priest who had died moments earlier. Sequence 7 spirits were exceptionally rare and potent. By fusing briefly with the high priest's spirit, she had borrowed his strength long enough to use his skills and make her escape during the explosion. "Father," she murmured, a faint, almost tender smile touching her mouth. "You can't go to the god yet. Stay a little longer and help your daughter." She touched the phantom lightly. The ghost contracted into a black speck she sealed against her upper front tooth like a hideous talisman. Footsteps echoed at the alley mouth. 2 men, tall and swaggering, wandered in, voices loud. "What was that explosion? Scared the hell out of me." "Whatever. Shame the pub's shut. Missed seeing Amy tonight." "Hey, look, there's a pretty lady over there." "Yeah, let's go say hello." Louise looked up. Her face was expressionless and her eyes were glaciers. The men took 1 step closer. They screamed almost before the sound left their throats, and 2 translucent figures rose, souls plucked into being by Louise's will. "The souls of ordinary people are too frail to be useful," she said coldly. "I need stronger, tougher spirits." For a moment she hesitated, then pulled her cloak over her head. She left the alley with 2 pale apparitions following, ghostly and eerie against the night. Her stride was steady and purposeful, as if each step carried her farther from the brink and closer to what she intended to become. Back at headquarters, Fury slammed out of his chair. The room felt heavy as thunder. He gripped a headset until his knuckles whitened, voice low and raw. After a long pause, he nodded to himself. "Okay, understood." He hung up and stared through the window as dawn nudged the clouds and the darkness of night softened. There were, however, some people he knew he might never see again. "Phil," Fury said, gathering himself before dialing another number. When the line clicked, he spoke in the same controlled, authoritative tone he always used. "Agent Carter, I have an urgent assignment for you. Bring the captain and the others back, now." "Yes, sir," Sharon Carter replied without hesitation. Steve woke to a white ceiling and the smell of antiseptic. The first person he saw at his bedside was Sharon. For a moment he thought it a dream. "Sharon?" he asked, blinking. Am I awake?" "You're awake, Captain," she said, giving him a small, relieved smile. "The director sent me to fetch you. You're still in South America." His memories assembled, fragmentary but clear. The battle, the explosion, the pull of something vast and terrible. He sat up a little to ask, and his voice tightened. "What happened to Eddie? Is everyone? Are they okay?" "He's alive," Sharon answered. Relief flared in Steve's chest, but it was a fragile thing. He watched Sharon closely for any other expression, searching for bad news. When he asked about Coulson and the others, Sharon's face hardened. She opened her mouth, then closed it, turning her eyes away. Steve didn't need the words. He felt it, a hollow that opened in his gut and wrapped cold fingers around his heart. He clenched his fists and shut his eyes, bracing himself against whatever truth Sharon's silence concealed. Chapter 156, Theory and Practice. Lately, Parker had been obsessing over how to play a drifter. He kept picturing the wanderers he'd seen, ragged clothes, tangled hair, haunted eyes that seemed to have nowhere to go. But he quickly realized he couldn't just grab a few old blankets and sleep under a bridge, not with Aunt May ready to scold him to death, and a job that didn't leave time to live on the streets. Besides, he didn't want to actually live among the homeless. The dirt and deprivation made him uneasy. So he settled on a compromise. He would treat the drifter as a daily persona. Acting, he told himself, didn't have to be rigid. Great actors had been reinventing roles for years. They didn't need a fixed formula for playing a tramp or a gourmand. If he was going to do it right, he would have to understand what made a drifter a drifter. Parker spent his free hours at Columbia, talking with professors of sociology and anthropology, digging through books in the library, and trying to pin down the essence of vagrancy. Within a few days, he'd produced a neat, publishable paper. Anna, who had naturally drifted into the role of Parker's girlfriend, couldn't hide her admiration. "Oh my God," she said, "you're basically a top student." Anna could happily live as a gourmand, spending her days baking and tasting pastries. Parker envied her ease and was frustrated with himself. Theory came easily. Putting things into practice did not. He condensed his research into 3 core traits: freedom, loneliness, and caution. Drifters had no fixed home and weren't tied to one place. They lived alone more often than not, and that solitude was part of their freedom. And they were cautious. Out on the streets alone, you had to watch your back or you wouldn't last long. The trouble was figuring out how to embody all 3 without becoming a literal homeless person. Kicking Anna out and moving into an empty room wouldn't be freedom. It would just be living alone. Late one night, hunched in a corner of the lab with the harsh light highlighting his tired face, he fumbled for answers. "Hey, Parker, go make me another cup of coffee, please," a colleague called. Parker's colleague turned, took his empty cup, and blinked. Parker, who'd been there a moment before, had vanished. "He was here a second ago. Where did he go?" the man muttered. "Forget it. I'll hit the bar myself." That was the moment Parker had been waiting for. If he could occasionally disappear from people's notice, if he could be present but unseen, wouldn't that capture freedom, loneliness, and caution at once? The idea clicked. He started practicing reducing his presence, lingering at the edges of rooms, staying in blind spots, keeping his mouth shut. He cultivated the feeling of being there but not part of the group. He was getting good at it when a voice behind him made him jump. "Parker, what are you doing just standing there?" He spun around to find the familiar, mild face of Norman Osborn. For Parker, Norman was almost idolized, the chairman of the Austin Group, the man behind the superhuman serum and the founder of the Patriot Alliance, second only to Uncle Ben in his list of personal heroes. "Mr. Osborn, Parker stammered. "Relax," Norman said with a small smile. "I came by to ask how Harry is doing. Anything unusual?" Relief flooded Parker. "Harry's fine. All his indicators are normal." Norman nodded, satisfied. "That's good. Carry on with your work." As Norman walked out into the corridor, a thought crossed his face. He paused, almost to himself. Little Spider's growth is a bit slow. Maybe we should speed things up and let him play the big game sooner. Then he shook his head and continued toward his office. No decision was made, just a lingering consideration. Back at his desk, Norman's computer flashed. A secure video request. He sat and clicked. The screen filled with the stern, grim face of General Ross. "General," Norman said. Ross didn't waste time. "Mission to capture the Hulk," he said flatly. Norman frowned. "How? With Bronski and Walker on the team, even if Banner transformed, I'd expect them to at least hold their own." Ross's expression darkened. He didn't transform into the Hulk this time. Banner's developed a new, strange, and powerful ability. He took Bronski and the others down easily. "A new ability?" Norman leaned forward. "What kind of ability?" "I'll have a full report sent to you," Ross said. "But that's not why I called. I need something else." Norman's brow went up. "You don't want Spider-Man and Black Cat on this? If Banner can defeat Bronski so easily, they might not be enough." "No." Ross's voice dropped. "We tracked Banner. He left South America and has shown up in the States. I know he's coming after me. I have to be ready. I can't let this man succeed." "If he's here for you, then we can't just sit back," Norman agreed slowly. "We'll send people, but not yet. Let them wait a few hours. And prepare another plan. Think about how we might turn Banner. If we can bring him over, his abilities would be invaluable." Ross stared at the screen a long moment, anger and reluctance warring across his face. Finally, he sighed. "You're right. If he can be won over, that's better than killing him or letting him go. I'll consider it." Norman allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. "Good. I hope this operation goes our way." When the call ended, Ross sat in silence for a beat before speaking to the adjutant at his side. "Bring Betty to me." "Yes, sir," the adjutant replied. And with that, the room settled into a tense quiet, plans forming, lines being drawn, and Banner's shadow stretching farther across the map. Chapter 157, Life Foundation, San Francisco. Uncle Ben and Jessica stepped off the plane and walked slowly into the bright, clear air. Jessica shaded her eyes and inhaled deeply. "Maybe it's my imagination," she said, "but New York always feels a little cold and gray, even on sunny days. It's depressing. I don't get that here." Uncle Ben glanced around and nodded. "You're not imagining it. I feel the same. Maybe New York has too many hidden mysteries." Jessica sighed. "Yeah, even the devil showed up there." The thought of Harry lying in the lab made her mouth fall silent. Uncle Ben seemed to think of him too. He was quiet for a moment before speaking. "All right, let's get moving. A woman should be waiting to pick us up. She's been waving at us for a while." "Okay," Jessica said, forcing cheerfulness despite the worry shadowing her face. "We should hurry. New York can't survive without us." "Don't worry. We'll be back as soon as we collect what we came for." "Let's hope so." Halfway to the arrivals area, a short woman in a business suit hurried over, eyes bright with excitement. "You two must be Spider-Man and Black Cat, right? I'm with the Life Foundation. Call me Lisa. I'm here to greet you." "Nice to meet you, Lisa," Jessica replied. "No trouble at all. I'm a huge fan of both of you. I actually fought to get this assignment." Lisa grinned. "Spider-Man, you're amazing. And Miss Black Cat. So cool." "Sorry, come on. I'll drive you to the company." Under Lisa's bubbly hospitality, Uncle Ben and Jessica climbed into the car and set off for the Life Foundation. According to Norman, the company's exploration craft had recovered several unusual life forms, possibly extraterrestrial, and brought them back to Earth. The Austin Group had since acquired the Life Foundation, so these specimens now belonged to the Austins. Their mission was to transport those life forms safely to the Austin Group. The task seemed straightforward enough. The only likely complication would be interference from the Life Foundation's leadership. If the Foundation had succeeded in discovering and studying extraterrestrial life, its head might be reluctant to hand over such valuable material. An hour later, a small island rose into view, sitting in the middle of a wide river. The water around it gleamed like a vast mirror. From the shore, buildings climbed inward in tiers like a modern fortress, and in the center a towering tech tower thrust into the sky. "That's the Life Foundation's main building and experimental base," Lisa said, tilting her head with a smile. "We're almost there." Jessica watched through the window. For a moment, the clear blue sky ruptured with a dense curtain of black cloud spilling across the sun. The world dimmed beneath it. A cold foreboding tightened in her chest. "The weather changes fast," Uncle Ben noted, frowning. "I hope it doesn't interfere with our schedule." Jessica's voice dropped. She couldn't shake the sense of looming danger as the clouds darkened, lightning flickering like warning teeth. The car crossed a long bridge onto the island. The instant the tires creaked onto the span, a chill crawled up from Jessica's feet and through her limbs. She wrapped her coat tighter around herself. Uncle Ben patted her shoulder. "Don't worry, it'll be fine." She managed to smile, but unease stayed with her. The bridge passed under the black sky and the storm crouched above them. When they reached the island, the atmosphere changed. The road was lined with tall trees, whose leaves knitted a canopy overhead, casting cool shadow and giving the place an otherworldly hush. At the road's end, a heavy iron gate carved with the Life Foundation's emblem, a phoenix with spread wings, opened. The car glided into a campus of pristine, modern buildings. Their destination, the central tower, was an immense structure of glass and steel that seemed to reach for the clouds. Lisa killed the engine and opened the door. "Here we are. Please, step out." Uncle Ben and Jessica climbed out and craned their necks up at the building. "It's huge," Jessica said, "almost as tall as the Osborne building." Clearly, the Life Foundation had deep pockets. If their space program hadn't failed, Austin might never have gotten their hands on the company. Lisa led them toward the entrance, smiling. Inside, a young, energetic man approached with an eager smile. He took in Uncle Ben and Jessica in their combat uniforms, a flicker of nervousness behind his politeness. These two were familiar public figures. "Welcome," he said. "I'm Carlton Drake, head of experiments here at the Life Foundation." He emphasized head, and Uncle Ben arched an eyebrow at the inflection. "I've heard a lot about you, Dr. Drake," Uncle Ben replied. "I hear you started the Life Foundation. Impressive work." Drake waved off the praise. "No need for history lessons. Come on, I'll show you around." "Lead the way," Jessica said, and together they followed him into the building. Chapter 158, Symbiote. The Life Foundation's facility was spotless and cavernous. Dr. Drake led Jessica and Uncle Ben through it with the enthusiasm of a museum docent, rattling off the history of the Foundation, the triumphs of its research, and the minutiae of its procedures, as if reading from a booklet. The exposition was long-winded enough to be a short book. After more than half an hour, Jessica could no longer hide her impatience. "I'm sorry, Dr. Drake," she said bluntly. "We're not school kids on a field trip. You don't need to go into every detail. We're not interested." Uncle Ben, who had been watching her with a wry smile, leaned in quietly. "It is interesting," he murmured, and when Jessica shot him an irritated look, he merely shrugged apologetically. Years in business had taught him how to smooth over things. He didn't want to make waves between the Austin group and Drake. But since Jessica was right, he had to back her up. "Still, business first. Dr. Drake, please show us the specimens." Dr. Drake's smile froze for a split second, then recovered. "Of course, follow me." His tone was polite, but as he turned, he subtly flexed his right hand. A bald man who looked like head of security, who had been shadowing them, narrowed his eyes at the motion and quietly peeled off in the opposite direction. Uncle Ben noticed that too and sighed inwardly. This wasn't going to be as straightforward as he'd hoped. They moved into the lab's inner core. Along a bright corridor were rows of compact rooms, single-occupant labs, and Jessica peered into them, curiosity tempered by caution. The cells were empty. "What are these for?" she asked. "Single-person labs," Dr. Drake said cheerfully. "For more hazardous experiments." "Like pouring sulfuric acid?" Jessica offered. Dr. Drake laughed, not wanting to linger on the topic. He led them through a security door into a brightly lit laboratory. A single lab coat stood by a bench. "This is Dr. Dora, my indispensable assistant," Drake said. "As for you two, Spider-Man and the Black Cat, I suppose introductions aren't necessary." "I've always been a fan," Dora said with a smile that was too bright, too practiced. Her gaze made Uncle Ben uneasy, like a prison guard sizing up an inmate. Jessica didn't return the pleasantry. "So where are the specimens? Where are the aliens?" she demanded. Dora glanced at Drake, then walked over to the bench. She pressed a hidden switch. Mechanisms whirred, and a section of wall shifted aside with a faint click. Behind it, glass panels slid into view. 3 tanks, each filled with a viscous, liquid-like mass, reflected the lab lights. One deep black, one dark blue, one a striking yellow. Are these them? Jessica stepped forward, skeptical. The masses looked inert. You aren't trying to pass off props, are you? They don't look alive. The black mass nearest Jessica responded before anyone could answer. It rippled, then produced slimy tendrils that slapped against the glass with wet pops. Jessica took a reflexive step back, heart skipping. Dr. Drake stepped up beside the tank and smiled with clinical pride. Relax, he said. We discovered that these beings cannot survive alone on Earth. They require a host organism to move and function. We call them symbiotes. Symbiotes? Jessica snorted. No one's volunteering to be parasitized by those things. Gross. For research purposes, certain things are necessary, Drake said, spreading his hands. Uncle Ben, practical as ever, cut to the chase. Give us the experimental data and the specimens. We'll take them back. Dr. Drake looked toward Dora and, still smiling, nodded. In front of them, under the supervision of Drake and Dora, the 3 symbiotes were sealed into a containment unit and packed into a heavy, reinforced case. Uncle Ben took it, and he and Jessica started to leave. At the doorway, they paused. Jessica turned, wary. That's all of them, right? No extras? Of course, Drake said smoothly. I have other business to attend to. Lisa will escort you out. We'll be in touch. They left in the elevator. Once the doors slid closed and the corridor fell silent, Drake's smile dropped away. He watched them go, then turned on Dora. You followed my instructions? Dora hesitated. Boss, are you sure we should be holding back a specimen? What if someone finds out? Then don't let anyone find out. Drake adjusted his jacket and spoke coldly. You know I have cancer. I need a symbiote to keep me alive. Do you want to see me die because you were afraid? Dora's face crumpled. What about the egg? What should we do with it? That's important too. Keep it. For now. Drake's voice softened, but there was steel underneath. After he left, Dora went back to the lab and pressed another hidden control. A second panel slid away to reveal a glass cabinet. Inside was another specimen, a 4th symbiote, silver gray in color, curled inertly. The cabinet next to it had held eggs. Now the eggshells were scattered, cracked, and a small hole had been corroded through the glass. Dora's breath caught. Did the egg escape? She whispered. She took a step back, heart pounding, and reached for her comm. Before she could call for help, something moved, too fast. A dark shape hit her from behind, hands clamping over her mouth and face. The world skewed as a shadow fell across her vision, and everything went black. Chapter 159, Accident. Uncle Ben and Jessica had just come downstairs and were about to leave the building when Lisa stepped in front of them, blocking their way. Her face was apologetic, her eyes anxious. I'm so sorry, she said. There's a storm out there, and the bridge has been washed out by the swollen river. You probably can't leave right now. Storm? Uncle Ben frowned. Jessica moved to the window, lifting a corner of the heavy curtain to peer out. Rain hammered down in sheets, a silver curtain driven by a furious wind. Trees bent and whipped in the gale. Dark clouds rolled overhead as thunder growled. The storm was far worse than she'd expected. Lisa glanced at her phone and offered, It's almost lunch. Why don't you stay for a meal? We also have bars, KTV, a gym, and a game room. You two could try some of the facilities while you wait. Jessica exchanged a look with Uncle Ben. They were both seasoned fighters, but there was no point confronting a force of nature. Uncle Ben, always cautious, sighed and nodded. All right, let's eat first. Relief visibly washed over Lisa's face. She led them to the restaurant, where soft lighting and elegant decor stood in sharp contrast to the raging storm outside. The table was already spread with dishes. The aroma was comforting. Lisa poured red wine for them personally. Jessica lifted her glass and savored the first sip. The wine eased some of the tension in her chest. Your place really is another world, Uncle Ben said appreciatively as he looked around. Heh, glad you like it, Lisa replied. Dr. Drake, who had parted from them earlier, returned and took a seat across from Uncle Ben. I didn't expect the storm, he said. I suppose I can continue introducing the Life Foundation to you. Fine, Uncle Ben answered. Jessica, uninterested in the sales pitch, rolled her eyes and concentrated on her food. Time passed. The rain still battered the windows as if the sky's taps had been left wide open. After a short while, Drake excused himself. He had business to attend to, and left. Lisa arranged a room for them to rest. On the sofa, Uncle Ben answered a call and frowned. Jessica, who had unusually sharp hearing, had overheard the tail end of his conversation with Norman. "I can't believe they lost so badly," she said. "That banner must be really dangerous." "Yes," Uncle Ben replied as he hung up. "Bruce Banner apparently wants revenge on General Ross. We need to get back and help as soon as we can." He turned to Jessica. "Why are you looking at me?" Jessica smirked. "I don't like Ross, but I wouldn't stand by if he was in danger. Besides, I want to see how powerful that Hulk is." Under his mask, Uncle Ben's face softened into a pleased smile. He was about to say something when a sudden, savage scream cut through the air. The restaurant went quiet. Both of them reacted instantly, springing to their feet. "This way," Uncle Ben shouted, and shot a web line. He swung down the long corridor like a black streak, still clutching the suitcase that held the symbiote. Jessica followed, her movements a blur, no webs, but every bit as fast and precise. In seconds, they reached the source of the scream. The sight froze them. A Life Foundation employee lay on the floor, a horrific scene of blood and torn flesh. The man's uniform was soaked, his head was gone, and there was a gaping hole in his chest. His internal organs were missing. The metallic, coppery smell of blood filled the air. Uncle Ben landed beside the body, pupils narrowing. "This was no ordinary murder," he said, voice low. "Look, his chest is empty." From the time we heard the scream to the time we reached him was only about 10 seconds. No human could have disemboweled him and removed his head that fast. Jessica crouched and studied the jagged edge where the head had been. It wasn't a clean cut, more like torn or bitten. A cold chill ran down her spine. "It looks like he was bitten off," she said, voice tight with unease. "Not hacked." "No," Uncle Ben agreed. "It doesn't look like a clean decapitation." He looked grave. Could it be some kind of animal attack? Jessica's voice trembled as a worse possibility came to mind. Or something else. "Remember, this facility is studying alien life forms." Uncle Ben's expression darkened. "You think another one of those things is here?" "Maybe," Jessica answered. The scales of danger suddenly shifted in her mind. If there is, then whoever or whatever it is, it could still be loose. "We need to find Drake and get the truth," Uncle Ben said. "We have to catch whoever did this before more people die." "Then what are we waiting for? Let's find that thing," Jessica snapped. They moved out of the corridor, urgency propelling them forward, the storm outside a distant roar compared to the threat now unfolding inside. Dr. Drake crouched in a locked office, breathing hard, heart pounding. He had not expected to run into anything like this when he waved goodbye to Uncle Ben and Jessica after lunch. How can that thing be so strong? He kept telling himself. He had found Dora in the lab, sprawled in a dark pool of blood. Her face held a frozen, hollowed expression. There was a ragged hole in her chest. Her internal organs were gone, as if some animal had ripped them out. Dr. Drake stared in horror. In a cabinet nearby, he had seen fragments of an eggshell. Nightmare logic snapped into place. Something had hatched, an alien creature from the crashed probe, and attacked Dora. He had discovered that alien egg earlier among the wreckage, but his curiosity about the symbiote had been stronger. He had set the egg aside. Now he wished he hadn't. He looked at the silver-gray mass still coiled in its container and took a shaky breath. At least the symbiote hadn't been lost. The real problem was the creature that had killed Dora. Whatever had hatched from the egg was almost certainly still somewhere in the lab, watching, waiting. He steadied himself and called security. "Get everyone to the lab, now." He was about to leave when something hit from behind with lethal speed. Instinctively, he rolled forward and avoided the lunge. He turned and faced a small humanoid figure, child-sized but horribly wrong. Its skin was jet black and slick. A translucent strip across its forehead showed a skull-like structure beneath. It had no eyes, only a maw full of needle teeth. Viscous saliva dripped from its mouth onto the alloy floor and ate a hole into the metal. Spines bristled along its arms and a long, segmented tail lashed like a scorpion's. Drake, scrambling for a name, thought simply, alien. He knew he could not take it in a direct fight. The only hope was to stall until reinforcements arrived. When it crouched and growled and sprang toward him, he swung a nearby chair and struck it back, then darted to a corner and grabbed a fire extinguisher. He pulled the pin and trained the nozzle, but the thing was gone, noiseless, as if it had melted into the shadows. Footsteps pounded in the corridor. The guards, loyal and alarmed, burst into the lab. "Boss, are you all right?" "There's a monster in here," Drake said. "Be careful." "Monster?" They fanned out with pistols drawn. The alien must have felt them, because it bolted out of hiding and streaked for the door, a blur of dark motion. Its tail stabbed a guard in passing. Gunfire cracked as it left the lab. Drake let out a breath he did not know he'd been holding. "Go after it. Chase it down," he barked. "Yes, sir. Leave 2 here," he added. "Don't alarm those 2 visitors." He meant Uncle Ben and Jessica. He didn't want them to see any of this. Most of the team poured out after the creature. Drake knelt by Dora and, with a cold pragmatism, told the remaining men, "Dispose of the body." He didn't trust leaving the symbiote exposed. Sealing it in a reinforced container, he gripped it and, flanked by guards, headed for his office. For the first moments, things seemed to be improving, but he did not know how fast and ruthlessly the alien could feed. The men hunting it became prey. One by one, they were ambushed, torn apart, consumed. Each murder gave the creature nutrients, and it grew. What came back to the building was not the child-sized thing he had seen earlier, but a towering figure nearly 3 meters tall, its bulk 2 or 3 times larger than before. Bullets pinged uselessly off its chitinous exoskeleton, leaving only white streaks. It burst into Drake's hallway, and the remaining guards fell under it almost instantly. Drake hefted the container instinctively, moving for the secret room at the end of the corridor. The alien's spiked tail lashed and struck him. He held the container up as a shield, but a brutal impact sent him flying backward. He hit the wall hard. The container cracked and was flung from his hands. The silver-gray symbiote spilled out and slithered toward the nearest fallen guard. In a heartbeat, it stitched itself into the dying man's body. The guard that moments before had been barely breathing sat up, apparently healed. Silver tentacles burst from his skin and fused into a new, towering form, a silver-gray behemoth with slanted white eyes and a bloody mouth. When it opened that mouth, a long red tongue unfurled, and it roared at the alien. Drake's terror curdled into exhilaration. This was the result he had dreamed of: symbiote integration, a living weapon. But there was no time to gloat. The 2 creatures met in a brutal clash, the corridor filled with roars and the sounds of impact. Drake backed into the secrecy of the little room and shut the door, listening, heart hammering. "Symbiote, don't die," he whispered to himself, shaking. The alien was fearsome, but the symbiote, he hoped, should be able to hold its own. After a minute or 2, the fighting stopped. The corridor fell unnaturally quiet. Drake did not dare open the door. He crouched in the dark, every ear straining for any sign that the monsters were still alive, or that they were coming for him. The silence stretched on. He waited.